My name is Charles Willie. I'm now 58 years old, born in 1954. I first came to England when I was the age of 7 and to Cardiff when I was the age of 28. Name's Charles Willie. I was actually born in St. Lucia in the West Indies and been over in this country, as I said, in terms of since the age of 7. In Cardiff, I think probably since I was 28, although I had another journey into Cardiff for a short period of time before then. Actually, it's really difficult to say. I mean, in St. Lucia, we used to live on a hill. So I can remember falling down the hill, because it's not a hill, it's made of rocks and all the rest of it in terms of that. So I can remember often falling down there. And I can remember collecting, or one of my jobs was to sweep the yard and to go and get the bread. So, and it's not sort of a kind of prominent memory, but it's a memory all the same in terms of that. And in some way, that it's difficult to say whether I'm making it up, yeah, or whether that's there for true. But that's what I recall and remember anyway, in terms of my young days. Again, really difficult to actually say. My grandmother brought me up, yeah, and I can't really say to you that in going back, which I try to fairly frequently. You recall things like my grandfather, and I used to play drafts with him, and he always used to beat me. Yeah. But I went back one year and I beat him. Yeah. So it's things like that you kind of got memories of, and it's like flashing bits of memories that it's only when you're actually there that perhaps, yeah, you know, things come back to you. So again, as I said, it's not prominent memories I've got, yeah, of life back home. I probably was too young at the time, yeah, to fully appreciate, if you like. Not my parents so much, but my grandparents, yeah. And my grandmother, Mahina, was very much a very strict person, yeah. And in a way, a basis of, and I can't even give you an instance where this is, but a view that I had was very much in terms of a very fair person who believed in justice and equity and stuff like that. This is my words, not necessarily. And that to me has stuck with me, in that you need to do the right things, if you see what I mean. You know? So, and it's not even something that I can recall specifically that she would have said, but all the same is the impression of view that I actually have in terms of how she was, and as a consequence how I have developed, yeah, on the basis of that.
Teenager.
Cold. And I always tell this story because we lived in London, and my memories weren't necessarily that pleasant, in that not only because of my colour, but of my name. And who was I to know the name Willie meant anything? Yeah, but you'd get children who would often tease you about, you know. So it was not only about my colour as well, but also, and I suppose looking back, probably laughed along with it, yeah. Which knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have done, yeah. But you do. So I remember it being cold. And I can't say I've got the fondest memories, yeah, but at the same time, I mean, there were good things in terms of friends who were both black and white, yeah, that I still recall, yeah, in terms of my memories, if you like, yeah, of those early days, yeah. Well, it's a story when I first came down to Wales, yeah, and I think this is still, and in a sense, can't really answer your question because there's big generalisations, because people are people, yeah. And so part of it, you would find that you'd find some good people who are English, yes, and good people who are Welsh, and vice versa. But In coming to Cardiff with work, I ended up down a paddle, and I can still remember this, back in, I think, 1977, so went into the paddle, just looking around because we were looking for somewhere to stay or to... As I recall, I was by myself. I went to the paddle, had a drink. I was going to have a drink, and a few people came up to me, and I can remember coming out there drunk and not spent a penny, in terms of that. And in a sense, I can say this to you, that in terms of, I still have a view and a feeling about Wales generally, about being a more friendly place, and not only through that incident, but in terms of other things, that have followed, a friendlier place, in the main, although, like everywhere else, you get pockets, but that's what I'd say to you in terms of being a friendlier place, I think it's a difficult question to answer in terms of this issue of prejudice, We all have views and prejudices. So I come back to the individual and society more generally, whether you're in England or Wales, is something you'll face. And again, based on the individual, go back to that, that's what determines the level, The institutions themselves are, I'd say to you, in themselves, discriminatory, in the way in which their policies, processes and so forth actually are. But more than that, it's how people then interpret it and how they act upon it, and it doesn't matter to me whether you're in Wales or whether you're in England, If an individual wants to exercise their ability and their rights, if you like, they'll do it, and part of that, despite the good policies or the good words that people may have, it still happens, More subtle these days, but it still happens. Again, having worked in both England and in Wales, I'd say to you again that it very much depends. It's there. I believe, as I said, that institutions in the main not so much are institutionally racist, but the way in which they've been constructed means that there isn't a level playing field and there isn't fairness. And as a consequence, yes, you can say, based on that, not necessarily based on people, but the construct you've actually got to work in, is what I think probably creates that discriminatory environment, which is kind of expanded on by the people then in those positions of power, who choose perhaps to take that forward. And I used to work in the civil service, and it's quite interesting because for the civil service they always say to you, we recruit on merit and we are fair and all that. And the words are there, and to a degree, within this level of what someone sees as fair, they practice it. But what's fair to you, Nicky, may be different, to what I consider to be fair, And so part of that, even the concept, of something on merit or something which is fair, is subjective, and someone will argue that I consider I've done this and I've done it in a fair way. And recruitment and selection and so forth, is a key example, of even the quantitative information will show you, that black people still don't do as well. And you've got to ask yourself, well, what's the reason for that, and it is societal structures and so forth, which I think causes a real problem and difficulties, Surprised to see so many black people. And since then, finding in terms of between Cardiff and Liverpool as to where black people first settled, still the argument goes on, when I go to different places they say that, And the multicultural nature of particularly down the docks, that there was an ease about that in terms of people being there and working together and so forth. Not everywhere in Cardiff, but certainly down the docks at the time. But interestingly, as far as the people themselves, is the basis of still being within, but okay, second, third generations, and you begin to sort of see the interaction and the links between almost everybody who was down there. And I suppose I'd say to you, I think that's not as great as, and there's lots of reasons for it, as it used to be. I definitely believe that the kind of togetherness that there was, doesn't exist as much as it used to. Many people have left, and people, different societal terms of children growing up and the views that they may actually have and so forth. So I think it's a shame really in terms of, and that's something that was an impression when I first came. Black people, and all these black people, was a surprise, because certainly when I first came, there was a view that one of the things I remember someone saying, "Oh, there's not many black people there, in Wales, but so that was a surprise to me." Well, again, I can tell you, I've read up and I know about this in terms of the seafarers, settling, and the nature, quite interestingly, and you'll be aware of this in terms of had gone through their own problems in terms of the riots and so forth, just across the bridge by here. So all of that is not to say, that there's always been that harmony or that unity or even that acceptance, but I think kind of gone over that trouble, to a degree, and that saying you just said in terms of being the most multicultural and so forth, it's not without a struggle, and it's happened over time, that there is a kind of acceptance, and as people integrate, intermarry and so forth, I suppose what people basically begin to see is that, well, actually, we're a little different, we have our ways, all of us, some good, some bad. We have our peoples, some good, some bad, and I think there is that kind of general acceptance over the years, that has actually come about. So you've got the length of time that people have been here, going through the troubles, and coming out of that, and finding a way, to actually do that. But the multiculturalism, obviously stems from Cardiff being a port, and the whole nature in terms of what that actually provides, in terms of people from different countries coming here, actually is what has created that, but in itself, it doesn't mean to say that it would have created a good multicultural sort of atmosphere without the troubles that people actually go through, to actually come out of it, In a lot of these things, there's not probably necessarily a one reason for it, I think lots of things. I talked about marrying, in terms of people living closer together, and sometimes needing to stick together, in terms of difficulties, Again, you'll know, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, and as such, and it's true, you can look back in terms of any piece of research will tell you, needing perhaps for families to be in a house, and those families weren't necessarily just from one culture or one race, in the sense that as African people, as African Caribbean people, we have our own ways, in terms of that, but a need to get on together, because all faced with the same dilemmas, if you like, and as a consequence, needing to progress that and go forward, to do the best that they can for themselves and their families, So there's not one easy answer to that in terms of that, but I think it's a basis of need, which often sort of takes a part of this, You talked about the view about multiculturalism, yeah, and I think again between Cardiff and Liverpool there is a view in terms of how things have developed, yeah, and I think again it's quite an interesting one as far as asking black people in Wales whether they consider themselves to be black or Welsh, yeah, or English or British or Welsh, yeah, and I think there is a kind of Welsh view of a black Welsh view, particularly from the younger people in terms of that, yeah. And I wonder, even yourself as an older, if you don't mind me saying, older black man in Wales, yeah, whether you're more aligned to the Welsh against the English, yeah, when rugby comes to that, yeah. And the answer itself, yeah, is to me anyway, I've only lived there 28, is Wales, yeah, always, yeah. So that affinity, if you like, is actually there as someone being brought up and growing in Wales. So, and that affinity is made up of lots of different things, as I said, in terms of people needing to stick together, but more so, I think generally a more friendlier place, yeah. And as a consequence, it might lead to the view that, in the main, the Welsh nation, yeah, may be a friendlier society, because they don't like the English either, so so you've got all that goes with it. My mother and father had emigrated to England, yeah, and said to you, I was looked after by my grandparents, and they sent first for my brother, and then my brother, myself and my sister, yeah, we came over to obviously be with them, yeah. So that's how I arrived in London, and lived most of my teenage life, up to my teenage life, in London. Joined the army, and came out of there, and through work joined the civil service, and they had this dispersal arrangement of moving jobs out of London to different places, yeah, and one of them was Cardiff. So that's how I first came to Cardiff, as part of a civil service job program. Yeah. Hard to say, really. I suppose the basis of, interestingly, in St Lucia, as with most of the Caribbean islands, yeah, there's very little work, yeah, in terms of the agricultural side of things, yeah. And nowadays it's more in terms of working in hotels, yeah. So a basis of a better life, yeah, or what was seen to be a better life, yeah. Not, well, aided quite considerably by the adverts and so forth, yeah. Because if you remember, at that time, Britain needed workers and went out to the Caribbean islands, yeah, looking for people to come over to help, yeah, on the basis of being able to further develop, yeah. So, with lots of promises, as far as I can recall, yeah, and whether those promises have actually been met or not, it's another story, yeah. But I suppose it's, in short, looking for a better life, yeah. Okay, a bit contentious, yeah, but how different is that, yeah, from any country, okay, that has a need, in being able to find a way as cheap as possible to meet that need, yeah, and when that need is met, yeah, to say, well, okay, thank you, yeah, you can now go, yeah. And the whole nature of the British Commonwealth, yeah, and being a part of that Commonwealth, yeah, as to what rights you have, yeah. I remember when I got my first passport, yeah, I wasn't a true British citizen, yeah, okay, but I was part of a second-class tier that they had at that time. So the nature I'm saying to you is that people, and in history, make use of people, okay, and always will do. And those who have more power, it is more prominent and more obvious, yeah, in terms of the way in which they use people. But it's not to say that us, as human beings, yeah, that's not part of our nature generally, yeah. And I said a little bit controversial in that, but to a degree, I'm not saying to you it's right, because it's not, yeah. But we often use people, yeah. And as a nation, if they could do that, yeah, and they could see benefit from it, yeah, having plundered all the minerals and stuff like that, but part of it, yeah, right, as wrong as it may be, yeah, that's a part of, I'm sorry to say, human nature often, yeah, in making use of people. I can go back again. I said to you about my grandmother and the issue about justice and discipline and stuff like that, yeah. And that's always been something very in me, if you like, yeah. And although I started on the basis of, I said I joined the army, a bit of discipline there in terms of that, and from there joined the civil service. And I should have said that in terms of at school, I was the first black kid in the top form of the school I went to, yeah. So that in itself had its own dynamics and issues, yeah. But so I had a bit of a brain on me in any event, yeah. But always had a view underlying all that was the issue about justice and so forth. When I lived in Hackney, even as a youngster, I helped develop a kind of cooperative for the residents, yeah, in terms of their rights, as far as homes and so forth are concerned, yeah. And that activism has always stayed with me in terms of rights, yeah. And as such, it's I think it's little wonder that I ended up in terms of in the equality field, and have practiced in that field for the last 30 odd years, yeah. So that basis of fairness, justice and so forth, yeah, has led me in terms of the different types of work, yeah, that I've been involved in, and work in the equality field in both in the private, public and now the voluntary sector. In the public sector, again, the first equality advisor to the Welsh Government, yeah. In the private sector, worked for a number of large management consultancy firms, yeah. And in the voluntary sector, various sort of roles, yeah, both in terms of previously as a board member in voluntary sector organisations, yeah, but all with the basic theme of fairness, justice, and trying to make a difference, I suppose, in the lives of people. Yeah. Again, this basis of giving people opportunities, yeah, and a long story in terms of I got involved in ACE anyway, but and interestingly in terms of mainly at the time children from the docks, yeah, in terms of being able to this view of academic achievement, yeah, to give a little helping hand if we could, yeah, but also I think importantly some cultural background, yeah, and in terms of bringing people in, yeah, to assist in that process, yeah, and ended up with both black and white kids in terms of that, yeah, but all the same it's about mixing together and stuff like that. And the whole nature of ACE, which I think was a brilliant idea and a brilliant concept, yeah, in being able as parents to develop, yeah, a mechanism which actually provided some additional support, yeah, for the black children in the main that we supported, yeah. I think again, and this is always will stay with me, as a small group of people to organise a trip to France, yeah, and to take more than 50 of us, I think, yeah, in terms of and the kids who'd never been abroad before, yeah, and the chateau we stayed in and all, a real experience, yeah. But you know the thing that to me most stands out, one of Homier's sons, yeah, came back and said that in terms, because if you remember we had to learn French or bits of French before we went, yeah. Um, that he'd actually got a gold star, yeah, when he came back, yeah, because his French had improved so much, yeah. And that in itself, you can't sort of beat in terms of what it was we were trying to do and the difference we can actually make, yeah. As far as something as simple as that, yeah, in being able to combine a basis of learning the language, yeah, going over there, practicing it, yeah, and coming back, yeah. So I think again, in many ways, miss it, yeah, conceptually, brilliant idea in terms of both the cultural mix, yeah, but the education mix that goes with it, yeah. Do you know, it's a real worry and a real concern to me in terms of the Caribbean as a whole, St. Lucia in particular, whereby 10, 12, 15 years ago, I could feel safe, yeah, wherever I went, yeah, in St. Lucia. These days, even in terms of wearing jewellery and stuff like that, yeah, it's a different place. It's not as friendly as it used to be. It carries more risks. And at the heart of it, yeah, is the influences, yeah. In the main, for the Caribbean, the American influences, yeah, but the British influences as well go back to human nature and the whole nature of greed and all the rest that goes with that. But the materialistic part of it that's actually often portrayed, yeah, in that you too could have this, yeah, and actually you don't have to work too hard for it to actually get this, yeah, if there was the jobs there in the first place. And the influence and impact of drugs, yeah, significant. And do you know what? Some of it in terms of the basis of even those who are in positions of power and influence, yeah, is what part they play in being able to allow, yeah, those things to continue, yeah. And I did some work in Russia once, and I always remember this, yeah. And a taxi driver talking about the Russian Mafia, yeah. He said, there is no Mafia, yeah. And I kind of pondered in terms of what everyone talks about it, so, it's everyone, he says, yeah. From the politician to the police to the court, yeah. They're all in it for themselves, yeah. And if any one of them, in terms of the responsibilities they had, actually took that forward properly, yeah, then it wouldn't be, yeah. But they're all on the take, and they all goes back in terms of looking after themselves. So that spirit, I'm sorry to say, has been greatly influenced, yeah, by this materialistic nature, yeah, and the influence of things, sorry to say, often deliberate, yeah, of giving people drugs and then getting dependent on it and so forth. And I blame Western society to a large degree in terms of that, yeah. Because, yeah, in St. Lucia we always enjoyed a good drink and all the rest of it, yeah. But the drug aspect of it, I think, is significant, yeah, and continues to be a real worry.
Are there anything that surprises you or shocks you about?
I've lived in a number of cities, because as I said, Cardiff was one of 5 cities I've actually sort of resided in. I wouldn't say shocks. I think there's a huge influence, yeah, I talked about the Mafia, about the and the nature of what that actually sort of means in terms of jobs and the view of Welshness, yeah, and going controversial about Welsh language, yeah, and what that means in terms of the increasing requirement, yeah, that there is around the world, and what that actually means, yeah, for black people, yeah, who traditionally haven't had access, yeah, to Welsh language, yeah, and although now in schools there is a requirement to a degree, yeah, but what about our own languages, yeah, in terms of how does that fit in, yeah, with those aspects of it? And again, there's a worry, is way in which the structures of society have been set up in Wales, yeah, that it favours particular groups, yeah, over others. And I can only say to you that I see more and more of that, yeah, taking place. And it's not a surprise, it's a worry, it's a concern, but it's not a surprise in the sense that the question you asked. Yeah. I think in London there are probably more opportunities, yeah, and as a consequence, there is a basis of more being done or more being seen to be done, yeah, than there is in Wales, yeah, because you've got the added context that I just mentioned of the Welsh language, yeah, in terms of getting on, yeah. I'm not saying to you that's an overriding factor, but it is a factor, yeah. In England, if you speak English, yeah, you do, yeah, then it's a barrier you don't have to jump over, if you like, yeah, in terms of the bilingual nature of what we have in Wales. More so, though, and I think, again, the question itself is kind of wrong in that when we talk about black people, there are some, what I regard as black people, or black groups, yeah, who do better than others. And something I would say to you that has always been a surprise to me. People in London, big generalisation, are more likely to take the opportunities that are presented than the black people in Wales, yeah. And sometimes I'm shocked by the apathy that there is, yeah, in being able to positively take things forward, yeah. And I'm not saying to you that there's not some who would want that, but there's a kind of almost laid-back nature in terms of, it'll come to me in terms of that, yeah. And I think there's more of a going out and getting, yeah, in London than there is, yeah, in Wales. Oh, definitely. It's quite interesting because I won't even go down the African, Caribbean, Asian dynamics, yeah, but even within the African Caribbean groupings themselves, yeah, the different islands, yeah. Which island you come from? Oh, small island, yeah, or the nature of that, yeah. And although I joke about it, yeah, there is still that view, yeah, in terms of that distinction that people draw between themselves. And do you know, even in terms of the Buttown, the community centre we have there, yeah, and making more of things, yeah, for black elderly people and stuff like that. We haven't even got, yeah, all of those sort of things you'd think, yeah, given the length of time that we've actually been here, yeah, and I see others progress, yeah, to actually, you know, get those sort of things. I think something's wrong there in terms of our own way, in terms of that. But Nick, I won't bore you with it, but you think in terms of why that is, yeah, this whole divide and rule culture there's always been is still relevant, yeah, and still appropriate in terms of many instances, yeah, which is a real shame, you know. Are you talking about different equality type strands or protected characteristics,
Yeah.
Sexual orientation, mixed? In training I often ask a question in terms of the hierarchy, yeah, of equality, yeah, which is treated or achieves the most, yeah, as far as the hierarchy is concerned. And yeah, the question will be white males, yeah, as a basis, but in terms of the actual characteristics, yeah, gender, sexual orientation, disability, race, age, religion, yeah, are often, if you like, the hierarchy that there actually is. I'll mention in terms of the other, but those 6 sort of main blocks, yeah. And as such, I think very much as with in Europe, yeah, the gender issues, yeah, and particularly the white gender issues, yeah, are prominent, yeah. But it's not as clear cut as that, because it depends where you go, yeah. But I think if someone was to sit down and well, part of my doctorate was around the issues about workplace and workplace dynamics and so forth, yeah. and also how different groups were actually treated, it will tell you that, that there is this basis, of more people would relate to. And you say, well, surely they would, because if you're talking about the Welsh population being 51% women, then that must be prominent in terms of the issues themselves. But I think the prominence certainly is there as far as in the hierarchy that I just sort of outlined for you. It's an interesting question. I think short answer is yes. Our lifestyles, and the whole nature in terms of what was traditionally seen as looking after one's own, even the basis of respect for the elders, I think that's not as great, in some groups, as was before. And even in those groups where you'd think, you can still see it, it's waning, and part of it is in terms of the next generation coming forward, as far as whether those same views, those same aspirations and so forth are there. I don't think so, to a large degree. As I said, in terms of part of it, you need to understand, what that heritage actually is, The issue in terms of retaining it, I think is slightly different. In this sense, if you understand who you are, where you are, and the basis of how you've got where you are, it doesn't change the fact that you are somewhere else, now, okay? And what goes with that, as growing up, if you like, as a youngster in Cardiff, if so, that heritage in itself, whilst acknowledging it, may very well change, And I'll just give a very simple example in terms of, and I'm not picking out on this, but a question I was watching on telly the other day is that should we have Sharia law, in the UK, particularly in places where it's predominantly a particular group and so forth, And it's been argued that this was about this group's particular cultural heritage, if you like, and as such should be condoned, and actually accepted, as that. I mean, I don't agree with that, because again, the nature of it, it's fine to understand, and even the basic principles of different religious connotations you've got all say the same thing. Again, it's our interpretation thereafter as far as these things. So I think the issue of retaining is much different, to understanding, And I go back to something very simple, which I started off with, about being able to have this sense of justice and fairness and so forth, which is fundamental, in terms of how we take things forward. No matter what religion, what race, what creed, what culture you actually are and so forth. But in direct answer to the question you posed, I'd say to you it's not necessarily about retaining, it's about understanding it, and being able to sort of share the positives, that they are in many of the cultural sort of heritages that we talked about.
So how do you balance those two out?
It's actually quite interesting in terms of people's culture, and how do you actually change? You can change behaviour to a degree, because the policies, the laws and so forth you've actually had. But will you ever change the values, and the ethos that people have, really difficult, your formative years, 1 to 7, in terms of what you actually sort of pick up then, And there's two other bands that people talk about, and the influences that you've actually got, And I can't remember the guy who said it, but by the time you get to 21, actually it's going to take something really difficult to actually shift, the basis of that. And if you think about society and how it's developed, that basis, of the views and what you've picked up, over that period of time, is going to shape you, and very, very difficult then to actually change that, As you move into positions of power, let's say, it's still that those values you've actually got, Although you may temper your behaviour in terms of that, I'm not trying to say everybody's racist, because some of those values may be very good, if you like, as you move forward, But it is that basis of that, and quite interesting. You see, I always say about the kind of reality TV programs, big Big Brother, or even a basis of X Factor and so forth, yeah. And when people say to me, who's going to win, yeah, okay, and unless you're so outstanding, yeah, just the population itself, the numbers, yeah, will tell you you're more likely, as limited as you are in terms of talent, yeah, if you're white, yeah, you're more likely to win than not, yeah. And it's common sense, it's logic, yeah, that tells you, yeah. And this old saying, people like us, yeah, we relate to people like us. And again, is that prejudice? Is that discrimination? Is that fair? Yeah. All of those aspects, yeah, are part of this conundrum we've actually got, yeah, which actually makes up this world we actually live in, and this unjust, unfair society, yeah, that's actually there. Spectrum, if you like, yeah, that people, this issue of the word diversity is difference, yeah, and I'd enjoy difference, yeah, or you or I in terms of attracted to difference, yeah, but if it comes and bites me, yeah, okay, I may have a different perspective, yeah, and the nature of it is even the basis of there's different things I may like, yeah, about different people, yeah, and it's not just the difference itself, yeah, and whether you're white or black, yeah, I might be attracted by certain things from you, yeah, and often you relate difference, yeah, to a different culture, a different this, that, and the other, yeah, but difference may very well be in terms of what attracts someone who's skinny or fat or whatever, yeah, and I'm not trying to belittle the fact that there is this underlying view in terms of, and I often talk about, what's the first thing you'd see about me if I was to walk down the street or come into a room, yeah, the fact I'm black, yeah, and all the assumptions that goes with that, yeah, and if it was someone who was white, maybe Polish or whatever, yeah, until perhaps they opened their mouth and so forth, yeah, you wouldn't have a clue, yeah, and you know, again, you make up your mind about people, yeah, often in the first 20 seconds, you know that, don't you, in terms of that, and if it is that I walk through the door, yeah, and all the assumptions I've got in terms of, so it's difficult, yeah, and again, I'm being very general in what I'm saying to you, and in terms of, it's a lot more complex than that, yeah, but in many ways, yeah, for the vast majority of us, yeah, we work on a very basic level, yeah, in terms of the way in which we react and treat with regard to people, and if somebody, which, as you say, may be more accepting to difference, yeah, may have a more open mind, yeah, that's what I'd actually use, yeah, than accepting, if you like, of difference, yeah. Start off with, again, a little bit controversial. Do we need to? Let me put this to you. Bhutan History and Arts, yeah, struggles big time, yeah, in terms of finding or attracting any funding, yeah, to actually be able to give a view in terms of the story of Bhutan, which would have a significant impact, yeah, in terms of black people more generally, yeah. If I was to say to you, and in terms of this view that people often have about embedding, yeah, to take things forward, yeah. If I had the option of being able to have money to develop, yeah, that as a centre of excellence, yeah, over above the Cardiff story or St Fagans, yeah, in doing bits there, yeah, my preference, yeah, would be to do that, yeah, because the nature you often have in terms of different institutions, yeah, that they do a bit, okay, there's always the economics that goes with that, yeah, there's only so much I can actually do. And even in doing that bit, yeah, how well do they do it, yeah, okay, is often difficult, yeah, because I've got all these other competing pressures, yeah, of these other bits I've got to do, yeah. And guess what? People at the top of the tree, as always, yeah, will say, we've considered all the priorities, yeah, and there's a degree of tokenism that often takes place, yeah. And I don't honestly ever think you're going to get to a position, yeah. Cardiff story is slightly different and, you know, sort of more of an opportunity than St Fagans, I think, yeah, where you'll be able, other than what they do occasionally now are one-off events, yeah, to be able to really get to the heart of the story, because it's a big story, yeah. It's not something that you can just sort of dip in and dip out of, yeah. And part of it, if you were to put some real money behind, yeah, not all free museums, because I think that, you know, in terms of economically, yeah, that would never happen. But to ensure that something like Bhutan History and Arts were properly funded, yeah, and could actually relate that story. And you know what, part of it, they're not institutions that should be working apart, yeah, but should be working together. And as part of that working together, yeah, is to understand the different cultures, yeah, yeah, that actually, so some may sort of have more of a view, if you like, yeah, Cardiff story, the Cardiff story, if you like, yeah, some faggots, yeah, maybe on a more Welsh basis, if you like, yeah. So I'm just trying to say in terms of how do you integrate that, yeah, and it's not always necessarily, yeah, that, you know, you put the thing in, yeah, and hope that the organisation itself, yeah, would embrace everything, because I think that in itself, practically, is difficult, and I think sometimes we have to think a little outside the box, yeah, of how we may achieve that basis of being able to share and work together, yeah. But bottom line, if money could be found, yeah, to better support our story, I think in terms of being able to have that money and put it in a place, yeah, where there's expertise, where, if you like, there's a focus, yeah, to my mind, be better. Something else that we talked about in terms of heritage, yeah, these stories, yeah, are heritage, yeah. These views that we're actually sort of putting across now, yeah, are our remembrances, yeah, our whole way in which we would be able to explain, yeah, where we are now, yeah. The newspapers may say this, that, the other, but to be able to sit down, yeah, and be able to give a view, yeah, about what I experienced of it, and it's this qualitative nature that's actually so important, yeah. And one can look back in terms of that understanding, yeah, and maybe even, yeah, I can see where that person's coming from, yeah, and where they were at, yeah. And it's that learning, yeah, that I think is important in terms of that. May not agree, yeah, oh, I don't agree with that, yeah, but it's about being able to, in some ways I say, make informed decisions, yeah, and it is through being able, awareness, yeah, and it goes back to what I said about being aware about someone's heritage, yeah, I think it's important.